There's a war being fought for hearts and minds, and you're in the trenches, whether you like it or not. Over the past number of days, it's felt like the internet, at least the tip of it that I happen to reside on, has been lit aflame ever since episode 2303 of the Joe Rogan Experience hit the airwaves. What transpired in the nearly 3 hours of this episode was a critical cultural moment that hit a nerve and resulted in a visceral reaction that rippled out across the web, fried millions of amygdalas, and to a large degree inspired the show that you've decided to listen to now, but more on that shortly. I wrote a thread on X summarizing my thoughts on the debate that blew up my account. As of today, it has around 520,000 views and was widely shared by some of the largest accounts on the platform. For a tiny account like mine, this was enormous reach. It was clear to me that others were invested in this. The crux of the debate between Murray and Smith really comes down to this: who can we trust? In recent years, there's been a complete erosion of faith in institutions and what many people would call the quote-unquote establishment. This isn't without good reason. People have been misled on subjects of tremendous importance. Take, for example, the COVID lab leak theory. It was initially downplayed and disregarded when in fact it now seems to be the actual origin story of the world's latest pandemic. Another is the cognition of the previous president. When those around him and those in the media were telling the public that he was cogent, his wife was chairing cabinet meetings. All of this is to say, people have a very good reason to be questioning narratives that they are expected to accept as objective truth. But, at the same time, many have taken advantage of this deterioration in trust and have weaponized it for their gain. The people who do this fall into two categories: individual influencers and geopolitical actors. They are distinct, but have some overlap as they can work together. Individual influencers and pop historians are motivated by clicks, attention, and financial gain. They publish the obscene knowing it will drive traffic, elevate their profile, and put them in the spotlight. Geopolitical actors, on the other hand, are nation-states that are foes. Those are the enemies of the West with a capital W. Countries that have demonstrated, time and time again, that their objective is to create chaos. Chaos induces division, and it weakens resolve. It's a means to an end, not an objective in and of itself. That objective is for the bad guys to get what they want without anybody stopping them. These days, that seems to mean taking more territory or resources, convincing people to hate their own countries and call for the downfall of the West, or using soft power and money to influence education systems, media, and the narrative at scale. The fringe and the outlandish has become a shiny bauble for people to cling onto, and the cooks in the kitchen are the pop influencer, faux historian, geopolitics gurus, and the countries that smile and nod in support of their efforts. To be clear, I'm not implying that every influencer that does this is backed by a state, but it's without a doubt that some of the influencers we both know by name that are pumping out this kind of content have financial incentives, knowingly or unknowingly, with nation-states that support this train of thought. Late last year, in 2024, we saw this play out in real time when Tenet Media, an influencer group, was taking millions of dollars from sources directly linked to the Kremlin. Some of the people involved in this scheme seemed to not know about the source of the funding, while others were happy to sit on a pile of rubles and throw glasnost out the window. And even if that direct connection doesn't exist, their end objective is the same. Both the nations and the know-it-alls are trying to flex the Overton window to the point of it falling off the barn. With that context in mind, we're brought back to Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith, and the question of trust. Douglas is looking at world affairs from the perspective of a journalist and a reporter. He goes to places to learn what's happening on the ground. He speaks to the participants in conflict. He understands on a granular level the details, and he sweats them. You'd expect nothing less from a good reporter. There's a reason that the Douglas Murrays and the Trey Yingsts of the world aren't reporting out in front of a green screen in New York. They're paid to be on the ground to get the story and all of the details, no matter how dirty they may be. Dave's position is that you don't need to be there, or really anywhere near there, to get the story and take a position and argue it. The disagreement stems from who you should trust. The surface level question here is, can you really trust someone who hasn't been to a place but spends significant amounts of time pontificating on it? On this question, both Murray and Smith differ, but both raise valid points. You can learn a tremendous amount regarding a place or a conflict through independent research, archive deep dives, and YouTube videos. You can probably hold your own in a debate and discuss the issue at great length. You're obviously not going to be breaking new ground on researching the subject, but that isn't what most of the influencers are trying to do anyways. We talked about that earlier. Without a doubt, anyone would know more of the details and the nuance being on the ground and seeing things for themselves. For a conflict as controversial as that between Israelis and Palestinians, going to the area and seeing it for yourself would be a good practice if the objective is to learn. But again, for the influencers, that's a side quest. You just need to know enough to hold your own. So, put plainly, the answer to the surface level question is the following. You can absolutely debate or discuss a subject without having been there, but going to the place and seeing it with your own eyes can only add value and color to anyone that decides to comment on the thing in question. But the surface level question isn't why we're here, and it's far less interesting. The deeper question underpinning all of this is much darker, and in my opinion, concerning. It's why the anti-establishment is more appealing to the establishment, why the influencers feel they can taunt the experts out in the open, and why those taunts are met by jeering crowds egging them on to stick it to them harder. Given the foundation that we laid earlier regarding an erosion of trust, the answer to this question is staring at us in the face. We've reached a point at which a lack of expertise provides more credibility than being an expert. Put differently, being anti-establishment gives the influencer an air of credibility in the eyes of the masses, while being a credentialed expert makes you untrustworthy. If the expert lied to us previously, they'll do it again, right? And that's why this becomes incredibly dangerous. Very quickly. If the experts are untrustworthy, the consensus means nothing, and the trust that holds society together at scale crumbles apart. Whether you see it or you don't, our society is built on trust. You trust the groceries at the store won't poison you. You trust the surgeon to slice you open. You trust the bridge you drive across won't collapse because the civil engineer knows what they're doing. We trust the experts every single day of our lives. If we didn't, society would crumble due to entropy. Bartenders would be conducting colonoscopies, and nuclear engineers would be flying 747s. But that isn't the world that we live in, and I'm glad that that's the case. And yet, when it comes to matters of history, geopolitics, foreign affairs, and warfare, we're being told that the experts have no credibility. If one thing is false, then everything must be false. We can't trust anything or anyone, and must always be on guard. Everything is a conspiracy. Nothing is real. That's the end state of the malicious trope of, I'm just asking questions. Asking questions is a good thing. It's the entire basis of the scientific method. But, as Douglas Murray put much more eloquently than me, there comes a point at which the influencer isn't just asking questions. They're trying to morph the narrative intentionally with the purpose of doing harm, changing minds, and winning hearts, generally with an IV infusion of toxic anti-Western sludge that comes with a mountain of confidence and a molehill of substance. If you only listen to those brought onto the Joe Rogan Experience for an understanding of the geopolitics of the world we live in, you'd think that the Ukrainians are entirely to blame for Russian tanks rolling into Donetsk and Lugansk, that the Israelis were in the wrong for responding to a terrorist attack and declaration of war, the likes of which the world hasn't seen since a bygone medieval age, and the retreating from the world stage and ceding influence to the opponents of the West is the strong and courageous thing to do, despite the fact that they will ooze in to fill the gap left behind and shape the world in a way that suits their interests. And then when many of these individuals, these pop culture clickbait PhDs in hyperbole, are confronted by real experts, they slunk away. They claim they themselves aren't experts, and as a consequence, indirectly, they shouldn't be held to the same standards. Or they double down, as Dave Smith did when he tried arguing the legalities of urban warfare on X with John Spencer, the chair of urban warfare studies at West Point. If someone spends the entirety of their career spouting revisionist history that 99% of their field has an established evidentiary consensus on, and they're hedging their work by regularly saying, I'm not a historian, or I'm just a comedian, or I'm not an expert, they're being duplicitous. Good history is done through peer review and consensus building. There's a reason that Benny Morris is well regarded on Israel, Andrew Roberts on Churchill, and Timothy Snyder on Ukraine. It's because they've done the work, and there has been consensus building. If critiques of their work were met by these men with claims of, look, I'm not an expert, I'm just asking questions, they wouldn't be taken seriously, and they would be laughed out of their field. It's clear that these kinds of comments are intended to shirk responsibility and obviate criticism. The influencers want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to challenge historical fact with heresy to suit their personal narratives, and then immediately retreat or cry credentialism when they are confronted. In the marketplace of ideas, anyone can speak about anything. But when someone is challenging an established fact, there is a high bar to jump and an onus to prove otherwise. No one is saying that Daryl Cooper can't host a podcast on history because he doesn't have a history degree. I'm not sure if he does or doesn't, but assume that he doesn't for the purposes of this thought experiment. What I am saying is that if he's going to claim that Hitler masked his anti-Semitism in the lead-up to becoming chancellor in 1933, after releasing Mein Kampf in 1925, when the book sold 54,000 copies in Germany in 1930, and over 90,000 copies in 1932, he's going to get called out on his completely garbage takes, and rightfully so. Similarly, when he claims that Churchill was, quote, a main villain in World War II, he's going to deservingly get a tremendous amount of pushback. The credentialism claims only come out when the ahistorical is attempting to be normalized, not when someone is covering history on their podcast or talking about whether Patton or Montgomery was a better leader in the field while having a few beers. There's a clear difference, and whether people want to admit it or not, Reach is power these days. There's an obligation to use it responsibly that inevitably clashes with the financial incentives of attracting eyeballs and ears. We're seeing that play out in real time. We saw it between Smith, Rogan, and Murray. When Douglas tried to call Cooper out during the debate, Rogan and Smith immediately threw themselves on the verbal grenade that the lone Brit was tossing so that they could defend him. At first, Rogan responded by saying that Cooper never claims to be an expert, and then, later on, in the same conversation, began attacking Churchill by asking Douglas if Winston was behind Operation Unthinkable, the top-secret plan developed by the British that would have seen the continuation of the war, with the Allies attacking the Soviets to prevent their domination of half of Europe, a plan that was conceived in theory but never acted on. We saw the shift happen in real time from he's not an expert, he's just asking questions, to I believe his talking points and now I'm going to defend them. It was truly an incredible thing to see happen over the course of minutes. It's always about hearts and minds. And so, fundamentally, to bring all of this home, it feels like a few dangerous things are happening at the same time. The establishment and the experts are less trusted by many because of the scar tissue that exists from putting faith in experts previously. These same people pick and choose when they trust experts and which experts they trust depending on the circumstances in their personal lives. The non-experts are deemed to have more credibility by virtue of not being experts to begin with, and as a result, they aren't expected to be held to the same standard as the experts. The non-experts will continue to push the envelope on ahistoricity and revisionism, and in so doing make people question reality and the founding myths of their societies. Lastly, bad actors will continue to take advantage of these narratives, jump on them, amplify them, and use them to cause discord. That's where we are today. And that's why I think the most concerning thing I witnessed coming out of this debate, and perhaps the biggest takeaway, was how all of us are living in different realities because of what we just walked through. To see everyone coming out of this debate with such a high conviction that the other side got crushed speaks to this. It's a testament to the whole idea that everyone has their own set of facts, and that the objective truth has been put through a shredder. There's a whole esoteric debate somewhere in here about epistemology that's come to the front since COVID and has been exacerbated by the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. But the manipulation of narratives and amplified propaganda is to be expected during times of strife. Social media is the new variable that's been infused into the equation to amplify this, and I've asked myself a number of times whether, due to this alone, the internet has been a net negative, and I've answered my own introspection with a resounding yes, despite me speaking to you now through that same vehicle. If Goebbels had TikTok, we would have lost the war. The German false flag operation on the radio station at Gleiwitz in 1939 would have been seen as Polish aggression by millions on TikTok and elsewhere. The landings at Normandy would never have happened. People would have thought invading Fortress Europe a suicide mission, and that narrative would have been amplified by the Reich's influencer network ad nauseum. You get the idea. We're all living in the same space, but we're also not seeing the same field of vision. That's scary. And I personally think the perceptions of reality are only going to get further and further apart. Many people, as we've discussed, want that to happen. The anti-Murray reactions to the debate were banal. While there was a torrent of support for Murray, you couldn't help but notice those crying for others to stop critiquing the mode of communication and address the arguments. And those proclaiming, who cares if they're an expert or not, focus on what he's saying, thousands, if not millions of times, over and over again. Undoubtedly, when the claims are addressed directly and head-on, as Murray did, they'll find issues regardless. It's always a delaying tactic. They disable you now until the next flashpoint arises, at which time they'll continue to try to poke and prod and puncture holes in your argument or storytelling. Well, I don't give a damn. And that brings us to why I decided to record this and launch Crackpot History. I became captivated by the issue after the debate, this whole notion of expertise versus quackery, and those defending the ducks en masse. On the first episode of most podcasts, most hosts state at the beginning why they've decided to launch their show. I hope that by waiting until the end, I was able to show, not tell. A stake needs to be driven deep into the sands of sanity to counteract the excursions to the extreme that are being taken by the influencers and the pop historians. That is the purpose of Crackpot History, to separate history, both recent and distant, from hysteria, to push back on the notion that the West is bad, that our founding myths are false, and that objective truth is real. From here on out, we will address the claims made by some of the biggest influencers of the day, whether they call themselves experts or historians or influencers or not. It doesn't matter. If they have reach, if they're trying to blow up the facts, if they're force-feeding talking points that benefit our geopolitical foes, if they're on the woke left or the woke right, they are officially put on notice. We're going to get into the weeds, crack their narratives, and serve as an island of calm amidst a storm of absurdity. Welcome to Crackpot History.